Well, good morning and welcome once again to ELEVENSES. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is my twice weekly webcast. It's show number 305 and it's Sunday the 15th of January and it's a reasonably bright morning here in London. Bit of sun, bit of cloud, but at least it's not raining at the moment, which is good news. Fairly packed show for you again today. We'll be looking at a tragic story of a driver who killed a motorcyclist whilst racing his workmate. How South London Borough Sutton is looking to block the expansion of the London ultra-low emission zone. Smart motorways are under fire once again because national highways take too long to reach broken down drivers. A 21-year-old biker was caught with drugs and a meat cleaver down his trousers. The weekend's AMA Supercross event in California has been cancelled due to rain. Harley-Davidson's CEO, in something of a shock move, if you can pardon the pun, has confirmed a move to all-electric power. Meanwhile, Honda's incoming electric motorcycle did appear on the Rose Bowl parade, and I do have a screenshot of that, which you won't have seen anywhere else. It's not looked and I can't see anybody who's covered it, but I think that's quite an interesting photo for you. And then finally, today we'll look at a report, an interview with Steve Sargent of Triumph, who seems to be pushing back against battery technology. And I'll be asking if his comments are actually justified by what's going on in the research into electric motorcycles. So that's what we've got for you today. It's quite a long show, I think. So don't forget, the first thing I want to talk about today is what's on in the survival skills world. So let me just bring the relevant graphic up. There it is. First of all, just thank everybody who turned up for the live webcast event on Wednesday. Didn't have a huge audience, but those who did seem to have found something positive to talk about after it. I did get one comment from Jeff who said that perhaps I went on a little bit too long before I got to the bit about visualization, which he was interested in. But as I said to him at the time, the bit that what I was trying to get over here was the explanation for why we need visualization. You need to go through the various logical steps to understand what the visualization topic is. Now, if you do want to review that particular video, there is an option. You can go to my Ko-fi page and you can access it there. If you become a subscriber, then you will be able to access the shop where you can buy access to the video. So £3 a month to subscribe and then £5 for the video. I don't think that's an excessive amount of money, quite frankly, given that you'll get access to around about 1,000 better biking articles that are already up on the website, and there's more going up all the time, of course. Next show will be 1st of March, which is Wednesday, first Wednesday in the month, and that'll be a Science of Being Seen, but it'll be an in-depth investigation, and I'll be looking at the data we have on day riding lights and what research has suggested might be effective in future. So okay, there we go. Do try and pop over to the Ko-fi page if you possibly can. If you do want to access that particular talk, you can find it here. Let me just take that off the screen. I'm making a bit of a mess of things again this morning. Doing too many things at the same time. So right, okay, there's the link to the talk on Ko-fi. Paul and Nigel have both looked in. Good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so on with the news for today. Let's just take that flickering banner off. Yeah, don't forget, of course, if you do have any comments, questions, I will try to answer them during the show. If I can't do it during the show, I will get back to you at the end of the show when I'm off air. So first story is, as I said, fairly tragic one. Two workmates who drove meters apart at speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. One of them then lost control on a bend and killed a motorcyclist, and they have both been jailed. Ashley Mace was following his friend Martin Rogers from Crediton to Exeter when he lost control of his Ford Mondeo, and he collided with 22-year-old Danilek Adamets, who was riding his motorcycle on the other side of the road. The bike was said to have disintegrated on impact as a result of the high-speed crash, and Mr. Adamets was said to have had no chance to avoid the collision, which happened around 6 p.m. on May the 7th, 2020. Mason and Rogers both worked at a place called Rotor Wheels in Crediton, and workmates were quoted as saying that they often heard them boasting about the speed and power of their cars, and one had refused to drive with Mace after being given a lift to work. The Defence Counsel for Mace claimed the two men had not been racing, but the two vehicles were actually captured by the CCTV on a bus shortly before they crossed from the 40 to the 60 zone on the way out of Crediton, and that CCTV showed Rogers travelling at speed estimated to be between 89 and 101 miles per hour, and Mace was just 0.3 of a second behind him, doing an estimated 81 to 93 miles per hour, and the crash occurred soon afterwards. Mace, who was 29, admitted causing death by dangerous driving. He was jailed for 5 years. He's been banned from driving for 7 years. Rogers, 35, he admitted dangerous driving too. He was jailed for 10 months, and he was banned for driving for 5 years. Now, sentencing at Exeter Crown Court, the judge, Stephen Climmy, said that from the perspective of the family, no doubt any sentence would not be long enough. But what I never get about cases like this is that both will be allowed to take extended retests. In my opinion, neither of them should ever be allowed on the road again. I'd be interested in your comments on that. Right, okay, so back to London. I apologise if sometimes the stories are London-centric, but obviously London is the biggest town in the country. So what happens in London often sets a precedent for elsewhere. So I don't apologise for covering some of the stories from London, and this one is interesting because it's actually about Transport for London's plans to extend the London Clean Air Charge Zone out to the boundaries of Greater London, more or less where the M25 sits. And it's hit trouble because one council has described it as unfair. Now, that's a map of the ultra low emission zone as it stands. That's actually the wrong map, isn't it? Because that's the central London map. What I meant to do was put up one which showed the extended zone. All right, too bad, I haven't got that then. But it's set to extend almost out to the M25. And estimates are that it'll bring around 200,000 more vehicles into the charging scheme. It's £12.50 per day if you do not have a car which meets the ultra low emission zone regulations. For example, my camper. But the South London Borough of Sutton has refused TfL access to install the cameras which would be necessary to enforce the zone. Now, a spokesperson for the council said, quote, "We are taking this step to send a strong signal to the mayor that he must start listening to local people. Though the mayor may attempt to force this unpopular decision on the residents of Sutton, we are clear that would be the wrong thing to do. Sutton does not have public transport links other boroughs rely on, like tube and overground services. Instead, people here need cars to get around." Now, supporting the tube, rail and bus network, and of course, although they may not get the tube down in Sutton, they certainly get rail and bus, supporting the network across the TfL controlled area through lockdown, running services when there were barely anybody using them, it hit London's finances very hard indeed. So this is the reason that the money is being collected. The Liberal Dem controlled council said they wanted to see action on air pollution, but vowed they would not sign an agreement or cooperate with TfL. So that'll be interesting to see how that one runs and whether other councils also start refusing access to TfL engineers. Now, meanwhile, smart motorways are back under fire. This time, it's the Sunday Telegraph. A story in that paper has revealed that it took National Highways officers no less than 1 hour and 54 minutes to attend to a breakdown in a live lane on a smart motorway section of the M5. This was back on May the 16th, 2022. As I'm sure you know, the smart motorways have been designed with no hard shoulder. They have these refuges at intervals, which broken down vehicles hope that they can make. But if they can't stop there, they end up stopped in on what was the hard shoulder, but is now a live running lane. And also, this was done to increase capacity. Now, a few shows back, I reported that the Office of Rail and Road, the regulatory body, had revealed that the radar-based systems, which are supposed to detect these stationary vehicles, are missing 40% of all broken down vehicles, whilst 3/4 of all the alerts turn out to be false alarms in England. And the OOR said that the radar-based system was missing critical performance targets in every region in which it operates. Now, the new data shows that the National Highways performance on getting traffic officers out to attend broken down vehicles is equally woeful. They aim to have every breakdown attended within 10 minutes, but the figures obtained via a Freedom of Information request revealed that drivers were often left waiting on motorways with no hard shoulder for 45 minutes or longer. This happened on more than 100 occasions in the 12 months to September 2022. Now, not surprisingly, it's not gone down well with motoring organisations, and Edmund King, who's president of the AA, he said that motorists have been left stranded like, quote, sitting ducks, unquote. One is almost lost for words, he said. 5 minutes waiting on a live lane is frightening enough. It must be absolutely horrific to sit there and just pray there is a red X to protect you. It also turns out that around 100 response times were actually recorded as having taken 0 seconds. And this is because a traffic officer came across a breakdown or traffic collision during a patrol rather than having been directed to the incident. So the response time is marked as immediate. But it doesn't take, of course, account of how long the motorist had been sitting in that lane before the traffic officer came across them. And given the failure of the radar detection system to detect them, one can imagine that there were it could have been there for quite a while. So critics say that this particular way of counting their results actually skews the response times to look even more favourable, well, less favourable. So I'll start again, to look more favourable than they actually are. If they were properly recorded from the time of the breakdown, their performance would be even more abysmal. Now, Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh, MP, said these terrifying figures must be a wake-up call for complacent ministers. They must act. We know current smart motorways, coupled with inadequate safety systems, are not fit for purpose and are putting lives at risk. And here's an interesting comment from Sir Mike Penning, former Transport Secretary. He said, heads must roll. And he criticised National Highways' complete incompetence at protecting members of the public. And he said there needed to be a proper inquiry by the Department of Transport into these findings. Of course, one might very reasonably ask why he didn't listen to the predictions that exactly this stranded driver problem would arise, because he was the minister who approved the rollout of smart motorways in the first place. Right, don't forget, set yourself a reminder. These shows go out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 AM UK time. They are nearly always live, very occasionally recorded, and even more rarely I do miss a show due to other commitments. If you can't catch them live, if, for example, you are in a different time zone, you can always watch them on Catch Up. Facebook, they are on Facebook. The easiest way, though, is to go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK on the end. You'll find every ELEVENSES is up there from the very beginning, but you can certainly go over there and easily watch one of the shows on Catch Up on YouTube. So do pop over there if you possibly can, if you've missed a show that you want to view. Right, Kevin has said hi, and he said he will catch up later as Dad's taxi is required. Okay, best of luck with that, Kevin. Hope to see you soon. Right, okay, back to the news then. A 21-year-old motorcyclist was caught with drugs and a meat cleaver down his trousers after a chase. His defence counsel described him as vulnerable and said he was homeless at the time of the incident. And she added he has been exploited by more sophisticated individuals. Well, I don't think sticking a meat cleaver down your trousers is a particularly sophisticated way of carrying something like that. He pleaded guilty to dangerous driving, driving without a license, driving with no insurance, as well as possession of the cleaver and drugs, and he was banned from driving. But the judge sentenced him to a 2-year community order, saying it would benefit him more than a prison sentence or a suspended sentence. Lewis Taylor was said to have panicked when officers turned on their blue lights and rode off at speeds in excess of 70 miles per hour in a 30 zone as he tried to elude the pursuit through the streets of Norton near Stockton-on-Tees last June. Officers duly found the cleaver tucked into his waistband along with a small amount of crack cocaine and cannabis. Now, over in California, if you've been weather watching, you may well have noticed that they have experienced a series of extremely heavy rainstorms, and the deluge has actually dumped something in excess of 12 inches, more than 30 centimeters of rain in just 15 days in the San Francisco area. And that has forced postponement of the second round of the 2023 AMA Supercross season. Now, this was due to take place in a stadium in Oakland at the weekend, and what they do is they ship in large amounts of soil and build a course up, but obviously they've had problems keeping that soil dry or dry enough for the racers to race on. So the statement said the safety of athletes, teams, operational and television staff and fans is always the foremost concern. So the round's been called off, and the next one will be at Oakland's Ring Central Coliseum on Saturday, February the 18th. So let's just hope the weather in California has improved by then. Now, of all the mainstream motorcycle manufacturers, which I would not have expected to be moving towards an electric future, I would have really laid odds on Harley-Davidson being one of the last to transition away from petrol-engined bikes. But as we know, Harley launched the Livewire 1 in 2021, and at the same time announced that they were planning to spin off Livewire as an independent brand. Shortly after that, in 2022, they announced that they had designed a new electric platform. This is it. It was called the Livewire Arrow. And in early 2022, they also announced that the first machine that would be built on that rendered platform there would be the S2 Del Mar middleweight. Now, a limited order run of that particular machine was launched in May 2022, and orders were then taken later that year for a production run which was due to start at the end of last year. Now, Harley have also announced plans to build the S3 lightweight machine. That will be in partnership with the Taiwanese brand Kimco, incidentally. That will also use this Arrow platform that you see in front of you. And looking further to the future, the Livewire S4 is set to fill the role of an electric heavyweight. But what about the future of Harley's ICE engines? Well, earlier this month, in an interview published in a design magazine called Design, Harley-Davidson's chairman and CEO, Jochen Zeitz, confirmed that the country is transitioning to become all electric. He said, quote, "At some point in time, Harley-Davidson will be all electric, but that's a long-term transition that needs to happen. It's not something you do overnight." And he said that evolution, a natural evolution needed to happen. So clearly Harley aren't placing any great faith in e-fuels, and that's something I'll be looking at in next week's show, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So, okay, electric motorcycles generally are coming and I don't think we're going to stop them. And what I want to show you now is Honda's first electric motorcycle. Now, just before New Year, I did show you a render of Honda's float, which was leading the way at the Rose Bowl parade, which happens at the beginning of January, ahead of the famous college football game. And Honda float was leading the way. Now, I'll give you a URL there, which is actually to the video from which I have taken this particular screenshot. Now, obviously, it's a little bit distant, as you can see from the picture there. But what I want to point out is the motorcycle on the picture. Now, I'll just try and zoom in on it. It's not meant to be too easy, but there you are. That is the Honda electric motorcycle, which was seen on the parade. Now, we'd seen renders which showed a bike sat up there on the parade. That's the best I can do. It's too far away to make out many details, but the bike does appear to have a single-sided swingy arm at the rear, which is interesting, and does appear to have upside-down front forks as well. If anybody can find out any other details of that particular bike and drop me a line on that, I would be fascinated to see them. That's the best shot I can find. So you can watch the video there. It's quite long, so I doubt you'll be watching the whole thing, but that link will take you straight to that particular view, 7 minutes or so into the video. Now, we've got a comment here from Nigel, quite a long one, so I'll try and read that to you. He says he's been on the southern section of the M25, not a very smart bit, got a red X and 50 miles per hour, moved over lane 2. Mile later, lorries passing both sides of me and no further signs working. Was I being sensible, putting my foot down and moving, or was I breaking the law? Most of our motorway equipment seems to be out of order and broken, except the speed cameras, of course. They are essential equipment. Well, what can I say to that? Yes, I was slowed down to 40 miles per hour on a motorway just recently. There were 2 miles worth of signs saying pedestrians in road. Eventually 2 miles later, of course, I hadn't passed any pedestrians. There was no sign of any police activity or highways officers, nothing in fact at all, and then just passed a sign which was off, and so everybody accelerated back to normal speed, of course, except those who were already just traveling at 70 miles an hour because they decided that there was nobody on the road. I think, first of all, the problem is that we turn these signs on far too soon, warning ahead about a problem. So, 2 miles away is getting on for 2 minutes. And whilst I appreciate that, not everybody sees the first or second or even the third sign, eventually most people will get the message. But if the other problem is, if you run those signs for too far, people just stop paying attention to them because they think, where's the problem? I haven't seen it yet. And then eventually, of course, you do come across a car stuck on the hard shoulder or something. With regard to the red crosses that close a lane, the problem is even if the vehicle is detected, if you happen to be towards the end of a zone that is protected by a red cross, there will be a lot of vehicles who've passed the gantry before the red cross was actually activated, who will come across that vehicle stopped with no warning whatsoever. And that's what really scares me about these. It's the fact that there will be dozens, potentially even 100 or so vehicles in that mile or so between gantries who have absolutely no idea that there is a broken down vehicle ahead of them. So I think there are lots of arguments against the smart motorways. I cannot honestly see how anybody can claim they are safer. I very much doubt the statistics that have been provided that say they are safer are actually correct. There seems to be a count of all traffic incidents, including the sort of minor fender benders that occur when traffic's moving slowly. And they're all added together, and they say that that makes the roads safer than ordinary motorways. I honestly believe that the data is being, I won't say manipulated, but certainly presented to show them in the best possible light. Anyway, right, moving on. Final story for today, discussion point, and this is about an interview that Triumph's Chief Product Officer, Steve Sargent, gave. Now, to me, it seems a little bit like Triumph are beginning a pushback against the electric motorcycle. Now, the story was reported in crash.net, and it's also, of course, been spread over the rest of their portfolio of biking websites. And what it says is basically, to quote, whilst electric vehicles are gathering traction on four wheels, where the big increase in weight is surmountable, the low energy density of current battery technology remains a fundamental obstacle for performance motorcycles. So that's what crash.net wrote at the beginning of their article. And basically, they supported this by having this interview with Triumph's Chief Product Officer, Steve Sargent, and he supported the view. He told crash.net, so we understand the capabilities and also the limitations of electric. Quote, let's not kid ourselves. Whilst the performance of an electric bike is incredibly impressive in terms of straight line acceleration, quite clearly they are always going to be a heavy vehicle, because with the technology that exists today, the battery packs are relatively heavy and the technology at the moment limits the amount of range you can get, unquote. So the first thing that struck me there was there's an immediate contradiction. He's used the terms always and at the moment. Well, never say never. The fact is, we'd be a bit daft to say that petrol engine bikes are always going to be lighter than electric and state that as an immutable, everlasting fact. And the article then goes on to quote what is described as the bunker-busting weight of the Energica Moto e-bike at 260 kilograms. Now, Sargent said, quote, because with the technology that exists today, the battery packs are relatively heavy and the technology at the moment limits the amount of range you can get. So the operative word there is today. Now, he quotes the Moto e-bike at 260 kilograms, but then says that the new Ducati electric racer, which replaces it, is 35 kilograms lighter, which is around 13% less mass. So yes, it's still a lot heavier than the petrol engine Moto GP bikes. It only produces around half the power of the Moto GP bike, and it only does it for around one third of the distance. But how long have Ducati and Honda been working on their MotoGP machines? Now, the latest four-stroke era began 20 years ago, and the 1000cc incarnation of that four-stroke bikes have been around for a decade. Now, Moto E only started in 2019. Development was disrupted by COVID, and only next year will the series actually gain a full world championship status. So even though, you know, there would have been a lot of carryover from, say, chassis design from the ICE to the electric bike, that's a really very, very short development cycle. And the broader investigation into electric power does go further back, several decades at least. But, you know, the ICE engine itself has been in development for over 100 years, since the basic principle of burning petrol in a closed space was first used to push along a vehicle from A to B. So whilst the technology that exists today might be a limiting factor, as Sargent suggests, every time we think a technology has reached some limit, something changes. And the first thing I would say is that there are alternatives to the current lithium-ion battery technology under research. You can find them quite easily, but just one example here that I found with a very quick search. The solid-state lithium-ion batteries, which are now under investigation, are significantly lighter than the conventional lithium-ion batteries that are used in vehicles. And this is because they use a solid electrolyte rather than a liquid, and they can be made with a thinner separator between the two poles of the battery, and that reduces the overall weight. There's another benefit too. They also have higher energy density, which means basically that they store more energy in the same size of package, which of course is lighter too. Now, I've also reported in recent shows on the ultra fast charge technology that US e-bike manufacturer Lightning is working on, and that reduces charging time to minutes rather than hours. Now, it's absolutely true that most of these alternative technologies are still in the early stages of development. They're not going to be available for a while, and at least until production scales up, they'll probably be quite a bit more expensive too. So yes, right now matching the energy density of gasoline is impossible with what we know about battery technology, and going forward it is going to be tough to get close, I suspect. But let's be frank, the road-going motorcycle doesn't need huge horsepower. We don't need 200-mile-per-hour top speeds. And the fact is that a far less powerful electric motor will actually provide torque from zero revs and with a relatively linear response. That's what creates usable road manners, plenty of acceleration from a much less powerful engine. We simply don't need a race bike on the road. Now, last show, I also mentioned that records have been set for riding an e-bike almost 8,000 miles in 30 days. And that was aboard the Italian-made Energica SS9 Plus, the same company that provides those first moto e-bikes, which are just been taken out of commission. Now, with a power output of 80 kilowatts and producing 200 Newton meters of torque, that bike, the SS9, gets a top speed of 125 miles per hour. And that's right up there in the sort of MT-07 new Honda Hornet bracket. And Energica claim significant range too. They say 261 miles of city range, 160 miles of combined riding, and around 130 miles of extra urban riding. And the all-up mass of that, well, it's 260 kilograms, which just happens to be the same as their outgoing moto e-bike. Heavy, yes, it is, but technology develops. It's not so long ago that the world was all agog at the Kawasaki Z1300 with its water-cooled straight-six engine. The specs are interesting. That was 120 horsepower from that motorcycle when it appeared in 1979, and that pushed it along to a top speed nudging 140 miles per hour. But it also drank fuel at the rate of 30 mpg, and it massed in at an elephantine 322 kilograms, 709 pounds, with a full 27-litre fuel load on board. So suddenly a 125 mile per hour, 260 kilogram electric road bike doesn't actually seem that bad, does it? And there's one other argument that really, I think, at least partly puts the skids under Steve Sargent's words. And here it is. You'll probably recognize that. It's Yamaha's own TE1 electric prototype. Now, the screenshot is from their own website. It's the page where they talk about how the bike has been developed and how it's got on. And the performance figures that they claim for this machine are actually quite stunning. Now, the bike is said to have the size and dimensions of a street triple. It's said to offer a category leading 161 kilometers or 100 miles of range. And the performance you get from this machine is 130 kilowatts or 177 PS or 175 brake horsepower if you prefer. That's at peak power. You get a 20-minute 0 to 80% charge time, which Triumph themselves say is a game-changing outcome, faster than today's equivalent electric motorcycles. And that is all wrapped up in a bike that weighs just 220 kilograms, which they say is up to 25% lighter than comparable electric motorcycles currently available. So presumably they're talking about the Energica there. So that's where Triumph themselves are right now. Now, of course, there's no word on how much that technology would cost, and it may well be that in fact pricing it for a production bike is why that model is not going to turn into something we'll be seeing on the roads anytime soon. But let's never say never. Honestly, I got into bikes just as the final British bikes were rolling off their antiquated production lines and out of outdated factories. And although a falling domestic market for motorcycles arguably played a part. The British manufacturers were slow to adopt new technologies, such as the use of unit construction and more efficient engines, and ultimately it made the range of bikes that you could buy less competitive against imports from Japan. Now, when Harley-Davidson clearly see no long-term future in the internal combustion engine, it would actually be quite tragic to see the British motorcycle industry commit the same mistake twice in a century by trying to hang on to petrol engines for far too long. So what am I coming back to next? So, well, Steve Sargent also talked about the use of biofuels in MotoGP, and there are plenty of people who are seeing that as a way to prolong the life of internal combustion engines in motorcycles, not just to keep old bikes going, but as a way to keep building new petrol engine motorcycles. And next week, same time, a week's time's show, I will come back to this question and I will look at why I think this is actually highly unlikely outside of niche markets. Right, that is the end of today's show. Thank you very much for looking in. I'll just remind you that the next live online webcast event is going to be the first Wednesday in February. I'm back to doing it on the first Wednesdays, so just over a couple of weeks away. Do look in if you possibly can for that. If not, hopefully see you on Sunday's show, which I'll just remind you goes out at 11 o'clock, and you can always catch up on YouTube if you want to. So thanks again for looking in. Very much a pleasure to see everybody here online, and hopefully a few more who will catch up later when it's available up on YouTube. So thank you very much again. If you are out there on your bike today, it doesn't look like too bad a day for it, but of course, as usual, please stay shiny side up.